toxic masculinity.
New York Times op-ed, these attacks on Jews are especially bad, they say, because it makes Republicans look right. What a bunch of pieces of... This is from Brianna Lyman, so you know who to hate here. I know there was, for some time, like with all the Milo stuff, they were suggesting that anybody who watched a Milo video, if Milo said he didn't like somebody and then that person went and harassed them, that was Milo's fault. So I should say, please don't harass this person. The great thing about my subscribers is that you guys don't do that kind of crap. But the Milo's people maybe were a little bit more rambunctious and would. So I don't have to actually say that to you guys. But just so that YouTube is aware, I'm not advocating anybody harass anybody here. But Brianna Lyman, I don't like you. I don't like her. And I don't think any of you should like her either. Because honestly, you don't want Jewish people to be attacked because it makes conservatives look right. Yeah, forget the fact that these Jewish people are human beings that don't deserve to be physically assaulted. It's just because you don't want conservatives to look right. What a fucking bitch. Anyway, sorry. Language. The New York Times revised a headline in their opinion piece published Monday that appeared to claim, while the recent spike in anti-Semitic attacks are bad, they're even worse because they help Republicans. Michelle Goldberg... Oh, no, sorry. Oh, damn. Yeah, don't hate Brianna Lyman. I shouldn't say that. Brianna Lyman is writing the good story about the horrible person who wrote the bad story, Michelle Goldberg. Which is weird, because it's like a Jewish name, right? Okay, sorry. Brianna Lyman, you're amazing. I don't hate you. You know who I hate? Michelle Goldberg. That was a horrible mistake, huh, guys? Or wake up, Chris. What are you doing? Michelle Goldberg initially published the piece with the title, "Attacks on Jews over Israel are a gift to the right." Her piece began circulating on Twitter afterwards, receiving criticism from some insinuating that the article deflected from the situation at hand, Jewish people being beaten. Yeah, you think? David Berg here writes, I know this may be a controversial take, but perhaps the main problem with domestic street violence against American Jews is domestic street violence against American Jews. Look at this. Attacks on Jews over Israel are a gift to the right. What a bitch. Ben Shapiro said the article was one of Goldberg's worst. Yeah, I don't read a lot of Michelle Goldberg. See if I couldn't rate it for you. Routinely a steaming pile of horse manure, he says. This one, however, is the Mount Everest of steaming piles of horse manure. That's a kind of a fun line. Dove Hickind, who I don't know who that is, but they've written, Michelle Goldberg should cancel herself. And Josh Hammer writes, simply vile. Let's have a look here. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David M. Friedman, called the piece idiotic, as it is. He said, in this idiotic piece, Michelle Goldberg pines for a world... Pines? Is that the right word for that? For a world in which Israel can be called an apartheid state without Jews being assaulted. Sorry, no such utopia exists because, one, the accusation is a vile lie, and two, anti-Semites don't discriminate in their hatred. Anika H. Rothschild says, is there a point at which the New York Times will say, nah, that's too openly anti-Semitic? Are they just going full Sturmer at this point? Sturmer, I think, is like, I think, is like a reference to 1930s Germans, 1940s Germans. Not 100% sure about that. Anyway, Anika. I used to know a girl named Anika. Not an ex-girlfriend. You don't get a bingo square. Okay. New York Magazine reported Jonathan Chait defended Goldberg, arguing that the actual piece does not minimize the moral harm of anti-Semitic violence. Although I did once have a thing for a girl named Aneshka. Kind of a funny name, right? Interesting. Anyway, now you can fill in the bingo square. New York Magazine reporter Jonathan Chait defended Goldberg, arguing that the actual piece does not minimize the moral harm of anti-Semitic violence. No, he's right, though. I mean, it doesn't minimize the moral harm of anti-Semitic violence, but it does distract from it. Because, I mean, I guess in a way, I think it does minimize the harm, because she's prioritizing making Republicans look good, look right, as the greater harm, right? She's focusing on that as the significant problem here. I mean, she shouldn't even be considered. That shouldn't even be a consideration. Who cares if Republicans look right? That's not a bad thing, you stupid idiot. I mean, these people are so freaking stupid. The reason I keep saying stupid idiot, by the way, is because I want to say something worse. And that's what comes out when I censor myself. Jonathan Chait, right-wingers are making truly stupid dunks on Michelle, whatever her name is, by screenshotting her headline. Damn it, I hate it when that happens. Screenshotting her headline, hoping you won't read the piece, which clearly does not minimize the moral harm of anti-Semitic violence. But I think it does. David Burge writes, I know this may become... yeah, I read that already. All right. Let's see here. The article, which has since been changed to the crisis of anti-Semitic violence. Smart that they changed it, but too late. Goldberg does note that first and foremost, these hate crimes are a catastrophe for the Jewish people in the United States. I mean, that's always what they do, though, isn't it? They always say, well, we should get this part out of the way before I get to the, what I'm really interested in here, what I really want to focus on. So they do give their little sort of, I don't know what you call it, asterisks. No, asterisks. Hate crimes are bad. Okay, now let's get on to what I want to talk about. But Goldberg then appears to argue the real tragedy of these anti-Semitic attacks is that the anti-Zionist Jews argument is weakened and that the Palestinians' rights are being taken less seriously. Here's the problem with the Palestinian situation that most people don't know. Most people don't actually know about this. Most of the quote-unquote Palestinians in Palestine are not Palestinian. That's a real problem here. Like, people, there's this... You would think, right, that most of the Palestinians have just been there since, like, the Middle Ages, right? Because in the Middle Ages, after the Crusades, and actually, obviously, before the Crusades, Muslims had taken over Israel through war, right? Because Israel used to be Israelites. Jewish people used to live there. And then through war, Muslims took over that region. Through violence, right? They were conquerors. They were colonists, you might say. And so these conquerors came in, they took over Israel, they took over Jerusalem. And then the Christians came in, they took it over for a while, and then the Christians left, and obviously they had sort of a diminishing presence there, and then the Muslims came and took it over again. The Christians left them to it for a while. But by the time we had the whole World War II situation and the tragedy of the Holocaust, Israel, okay, well, that region had been taken over by the United Kingdom, right? So Britain had essentially had control over Israel at that point. But the Muslims who lived there had massively neglected Israel. Israel had been, the cities, Jerusalem, all the cities were barely populated, right? It had very few people, very few families, and it just wasn't built up in any way. It wasn't a sophisticated metropolis. It wasn't really a first world country. It hadn't kept up with the rest of the world, at least with the rest of the developed world. So what happened was Britain said, okay, there's this Jewish homeland in Israel. Let's give it back to the Jewish people. And, we can resettle some of the Palestinians that are living there, and we'll sort of negotiate it. And they did. And they negotiated moving the Jewish people back to Israel. And the people who were living in Palestine at the time, they negotiated that deal. They worked the deal out with the British, and the other allied countries that were trying to figure this out. And it was, it was fine. It was a deal that was made. Everything was sort of, I'm sure there were some people that weren't happy with it, but for the most part, people were happy with it. And, the deal went through and the Jews were brought back in. And here's the thing, the German Jews that were brought in, most of them German, some of them Polish and whatnot, were very sophisticated people. And they ended up building up Israel into a first world nation, right? They're a very sophisticated, very modern country now. technologically advanced, lots of money, very rich, um, modern, successful, wealthy country. And when you build up a region and you make it really nice, other people are going to want to live there, right? That's why we have so much illegal immigration into the United States. That's why there's so much illegal immigration into Europe. So many people want to live in the nice places in the world that have been built up by other people. And I forgot I had these on. And so the Jews ended up making Israel such a nice place to live that all these Muslims from all over the region were like, oh, that was our place. That's our place. We're supposed to have that. That's ours. That's for us. And so some people tried to move back into Israel, into the region, from all kinds of places, from all over the Middle East. It wasn't just people who were formerly Palestinian that were staying there. The place got flooded by other, Arabs and, people from Iran and all kinds of places. And a lot of the other countries in the region were like, I don't think it's right that Jews live in Israel again, because they were racist. They were racist against the Jews. They were anti-Semitic. So what did they do? They started to encourage this kind of terrorism, these kind of attacks on Israel. And this has never stopped, right? The reason that Israel is attacked so much is because the other countries around them want them to be attacked. It's not because there's Palestinians that have been living there for hundreds of years and that they feel like that's their land and they deserve it. No. In fact, I would say a very small percentage, if any, of the Palestinians that are there, so-called Palestinians, can lay claim to any part of Israel, any part of what they consider to be Palestine. A lot of them need to go back to Syria, need to go back to Iran, need to go back to Saudi Arabia or wherever they're from. So I don't feel like they have any kind of right to any of that land. It's just Muslims saying, oh, this should be a Muslim place and therefore we're going to attack the Jews. That's not a good argument. That's ridiculous. So there's a lot about the history of that region that people don't know. They think, oh, well, it's just two groups of people who at one point both of them lived there, and one of them thinks that they should, their ancestors lived there, and one of them thinks that they should be there because their ancestors lived there. The other group thinks they should live there because their ancestors lived there. But the truth is, the Jews' ancestors definitely lived there. The quote-unquote Palestinians' ancestors, well, a lot of them, no, they did not live there. That's not true at all. So they just need to piss off and stop sending bombs into Israel. Anyway, that's most of the stuff that I've read about it. And I could be wrong about some of that. You can let me know in the comments. But I think that is, from everything I've read, that seems to be that's my take. That's what I understand about it. Okay, let's have a look here. And then she goes on to write, but this violence threatens to undermine the progress that's being made in getting American politicians to take Palestinian rights more seriously. You don't have any rights. Sending missiles into a country and nagging them to give you more land isn't, there's no, what rights? What the hell are you talking about? Goldberg writes, right-wing Zionists and anti-Semitic anti-Zionists have something fundamentally in common. Both conflate the Jewish people with the Israeli state. Now, that's something I kind of agree with. There is this concept that if you criticize Israel, you're criticizing Jews, and it's anti-Semitic. I don't believe that at all. I think we should totally be able to criticize Israel. The problem is, and I've talked about this because there's this guy, Nick Fuentes. He's quite popular amongst younger, kind of, right-wing people who, but he has some kind of messed up views. He doesn't believe in interracial marriage, which I don't agree with. And another thing, he thinks he's constantly complaining about Israel, but he always makes this point that we should be able to criticize Israel and it shouldn't be considered anti-Semitic. And I agree with him on that point. But I was talking to a mutual friend of ours. We have a mutual friend. Nick and I have a mutual friend, and we're talking about Nick, and we're complaining about the fact that although he is right about that, the fact that he makes that argument undermines the argument, because it's an argument that should be made by people who are not anti-Semitic, probably like myself, but I don't care enough to bring that up very often, right? But then somebody like him, he brings it up all the time, but we both suspect, although we haven't, I've not spoken to him about this personally, but I don't think my friend has either. We both suspect that he is in fact anti-Semitic. So if the only people that are discussing this concept, which I think is totally legitimate, are in fact anti-Semites, and I shouldn't say that Nick Fuentes is, I don't have any proof that he is, but he seems kind of like he is, or at least people that are perceived to be anti-Semites, well, it kind of undermines the argument, doesn't it? But I do think it's a correct argument, despite that fact that it's coming from somebody who's may or may not be an anti-Semite. I do think that the argument still holds, and I actually think most Jewish people would agree with that. Because do you think there are Jewish people in Israel who don't complain about their government? Of course they do. Everybody in every country complains about their government. So the idea that we're not allowed to critique Israel because it's anti-Semitic, well, that's just ridiculous. Of course people in Israel complain about their own government. Of course. So can I, as a white Christian American, criticize the Israeli government? Yeah, of course. Just like I can criticize black culture, just as I can criticize anything. Because I have a brain and I have experiences and I can, think and I can talk about this kind of stuff, as can you, as we all can. So, I don't think any kind of subject should be off limits, just because people say, oh, you're an anti-Semite or oh, you're a racist or whatever, whatever. You should be able to express yourself in any way you want. And, whether or not people are going to take you seriously or think you're some kind of racist, I mean, whatever, that's just part of the game. But I certainly don't think we should be throwing around accusations of bigotry just because you don't agree with somebody. I don't think you should ever do that, right? But anyway, let's finish this up. Both conflate the Jew. Okay, yeah, right. Many progressives, particularly progressive Jews, have worked hard to break this automatic identification and to open up space in the Democratic Party, the Democrat Party, not the Democratic Party. They're not democratic, they're criminals. To denounce Israel's entrenched occupation and human rights abuses. This wave of anti-Semitic violence will increase the difficulty of that work. The Zionist right claims that to assail Israel is to assail all Jews. Well, I guess I would say that I don't think that's probably true. I don't know if that's true. I don't think that's true. Are there people on the right that say anytime you criticize Israel, you're criticizing the Jews? I don't think so. Those who terrorize Jews out of rage at Israel seem to make their point for them. Well, that's right. To say that you can criticize Israel and that doesn't mean you're necessarily criticizing Jews. You can have that exist in the world. And you can also have anti-Semites exist in the world, right? You can have people who genuinely are anti-Semitic, and you can have people who are not anti-Semitic but criticize Israel. Both of those things exist. And the people that are physically assaulting Jews in the streets of New York and LA out here, they're just anti-Semitic. They're not criticizing Israel. They're anti-Semitic. Conservatives recognize that. I mean, here's the problem. She doesn't want us to look right, but she's stuck in this situation in which we are right. So you may not want us to look right, but don't write an article about how that annoys you. How about this? How about instead of writing an article about how it annoys you that Republicans look like they're right, how about this? How about just accept that sometimes Republicans are right about some things? But I know that's dangerous because it's a slippery slope, and eventually you'll probably find out that we're right about almost everything, if not everything. How terrible would that be for you? Goldberg also claims that violence is, quote, motivated by anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism. Zionism is a movement that supports the Jewish state, while in some of the recent attacks, the perpetuators have called Jews Zionists. It's important to note that not all Jewish people are Zionists. Goldberg's critics point out that attributing the recent spike in hate crimes to the anti-Zionist movement arguably obscures the central issue, which is that these attacks appear to be motivated by anti-Semitism. Well, that's exactly right. Daily Caller has reached out to the New York Times, but have not received a response at time of publication. I do apologize to Brianna Lyman. I originally said I don't like you, but that's not true because you were just reporting for Daily Caller. You're lovely. It's this Michelle Goldberg who I don't like. Michelle Goldberg is the scum. Brianna Lyman, lovely person. So sorry for that mistake, and sorry for my viewers. That was a terrible thing to say. All right, well, I am done talking about this. I am done with that story. So let's read some comments and questions. Do you guys have anything to say about this stuff? I don't know. Let's find out. There was a couple of super chats, I think. Let's have a look here. MJ Jackson writes, my psychology professor let me expose this in his class and gave me 100%. I don't know what story that's about. I don't know what story that's about. I guess we're talking about communists at the time. That's great. That's awesome. You've got a good college professor. It's very unusual. Let's see here. Joshua Sanabria says toxic masculinity seems most of Trump's fact checks were there's around 10,000 insert blank fact check. Partially false. There's actually 9,995 insert blank. Well, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, it wasn't just that. It was also like opinions. Like if Trump would say, we want to preserve the life of the child in the womb, they'd be like, fact check. This is just a cluster of cells. There is no child in the womb. Well, it's like, it's not really a fact check, is it? That's the whole schism in the whole. That's the whole political divide. The whole political divide. Oh, Ashley took a picture. Toxic Masculinity. Weekdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.